The ocean was calm that morning, almost too calm. But beneath the waves and across the horizon, something deadly moved with purpose. Japanese sailors whispered its name with fear. American crews spoke it with pride. And soon the enemy would know exactly why. This was the most dangerous American warship of World War II. A floating beast that could strike faster, hit harder, and survive where others sank. But what made this warship so terrifying? That's the story we're about to uncover. When World War II erupted across the Pacific, the U.S. Navy faced a terrifying challenge. Japan's imperial fleet dominated vast waters, armed with some of the most powerful battleships and aircraft carriers ever built. The U.S. needed something extraordinary, not just a ship, but a weapon of fear, and that's when American engineers and naval commanders began crafting a warship unlike anything the world had seen before. It wasn't the biggest ship, it didn't carry the most guns, but it was built to do one thing perfectly: hunt and destroy. Fast, armored, and devastatingly effective, this ship could strike enemy convoys, take on submarines, and even challenge larger warships. Its design came from desperation, and its success came from pure innovation. The story begins in 1942, when the tide of war had turned dangerously against the Allies. Japanese forces controlled the Pacific, their navy roaming freely from the Philippines to the Solomon Islands. American shipyards were working nonstop, but traditional battleships were too slow, too costly, and too vulnerable to air attack. What America needed was a new kind of weapon, something that could move fast, strike hard, and survive in a modern, mechanized war at sea. That's when the U.S. Navy's vision changed. Instead of massive ships lumbering across the ocean, they wanted something smaller but deadlier. The idea was to build a class of warships that combined speed, armor, and firepower into one deadly package. From that idea emerged a new generation of naval killers, destroyers and cruisers that could outmaneuver any opponent. But one warship among them soon gained a reputation that spread through every fleet report and enemy radio transmission. It was practically unstoppable. This ship's journey began in secrecy. Its keel was laid in an American shipyard buzzing with a wartime urgency. Thousands of men and women working around the clock, hammering steel, welding armor, and preparing a weapon meant to hunt Japan's navy across every sea. Engineers studied previous ship designs, the failures at Pearl Harbor, the lessons from the Coral Sea, and combined them into one ultimate creation. It had powerful anti-aircraft guns, torpedoes that could tear a destroyer apart, and radar systems that could track enemies before they were even visible to the human eye. But the real secret wasn't just in its weapons, it was in its speed. Most warships of that era could barely manage 25 knots. This one could sprint across the ocean at more than 35 knots, closing the distance before the enemy could even react. In naval warfare, that kind of speed meant one thing: you struck first, and you struck hard. The first time it entered combat, even its own crew couldn't believe what they were part of. As enemy aircraft approached, the ship's gunners opened fire with an accuracy that stunned everyone. Japanese pilots, trained to dive and strike slow-moving targets, found themselves facing a ship that was fast, well-defended, and deadly accurate. The sea around it erupted in explosions and fire, and the unstoppable ship legend began that day. Word spread quickly across the Pacific. Japanese intelligence started referring to this American ship as a ghost hunter because it appeared out of nowhere, unleashed case, and vanished before a counterattack could arrive. Convoys changed routes to avoid it. Even submarines began steering clear of its hunting zones. In a war where reputation often mattered as much as firepower, this ship's name carried a weight of fear. But behind the steel and speed was something equally important: the crew. Many were young, barely out of high school, trained for just a few months before being sent into combat. Yet inside this warship, they became a single, deadly machine. Every sailor knew his role. Every gunner trusted his crew. In the chaos of naval warfare, deafening explosions, walls of smoke, and flashes of enemy fire, their teamwork turned the ship into a living weapon. Still, being the most dangerous warship came at a cost. The enemy didn't ignore it. Japanese bombers began targeting it in every battle. Torpedoes streaked toward it under dark waters. Every mission carried the risk of never coming back. But somehow, time after time, this ship returned, scarred, smoking, sometimes half destroyed. Yet always alive, it became a symbol of American determination and naval might. By 1944, this ship had destroyed enemy destroyers, downed dozens of planes, and protected vital Allied invasions across the Pacific. Wherever it went, victory followed. Its guns tore through enemy formations. Its radar picked up threats long before they were seen. In a war that demanded speed, precision, and courage, this ship had all three. And what made it truly legendary wasn't just the number of ships it sank or the missions it survived. It was the message it sent. The Japanese Navy, once confident and feared, now realized there was a new predator in the ocean, one that was faster, smarter, and built for vengeance. By the time the war neared its end, this American warship had carved its name into naval history. Even today, historians and veterans remember it not just as a machine of war, but as a turning point, proof that innovation, courage, and unity could overpower even the mightiest enemy fleet. So what exactly was this ship? How was it built? And what specific battles made it so feared? Those are the stories that reveal why this became the most dangerous American warship of World War II. By mid-1943, this American warship had already earned a reputation that spread like wildfire across the Pacific. The sailors aboard called her a floating thunderstorm, because whenever she entered a fight, she left nothing but chaos behind. The Japanese called her something else, the Sea Wolf. To them, she was unpredictable, aggressive, and impossible to kill. But behind that fearsome legend was a story of design brilliance, battlefield innovation, and the brave men who pushed both machine and themselves to their absolute limits. The ship we're talking about was none other than the USS Johnston, DDD 557, a Fletcher-class destroyer that would become one of the most famous and dangerous warships in American history. She wasn't the largest, nor the heaviest, but under the command of Commander Ernest E. Evans, she became a symbol of courage, speed, and determination. The USS Johnston's story wasn't just about firepower. It was about heart, leadership, and the will to fight even when defeat seemed certain. When the Johnston was commissioned in 1943, it was one of over 170 Fletcher-class destroyers built by the United States. Each was a masterpiece of wartime engineering, sleek, fast, and packed with weaponry. They carried 5 5-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft cannons, depth charges, and deadly torpedoes. But what truly made these ships dangerous was their ability to do almost everything: anti-air, anti-submarine, escort, and direct surface combat. In a war that demanded flexibility, these destroyers were the Navy's Swiss Army knives. The USS Johnston's crew quickly learned they were aboard something special. From her first shakedown cruise, she proved she could outrun nearly anything in the ocean. The engines roared with a raw, mechanical fury that made the deck tremble. But what made her truly dangerous was her commander, Ernest Evans, a man born to fight. Evans was known among sailors as bold, even reckless, but his men loved him. When he took command, he told his crew something they would never forget. "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Nobody got off. Under Evans' leadership, the USS Johnston became more than just a destroyer. It became a pack of wolves ready to tear through the enemy's lines, and soon they would face the greatest test any destroyer had ever seen. The Battle off Samar, part of the massive Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. In October 1944, the Allies launched the invasion of the Philippines to cut Japan's last lines of supply. The Japanese Navy, desperate to stop them, unleashed everything it had: battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and even suicide planes. Among those massive forces was a terrifying Japanese fleet led by the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, armed with 18-inch guns that could obliterate a destroyer in a single hit. On the morning of October 25, 1944, the USS Johnston and a small group of American escort carriers and destroyers, known as Taffy 3, were sailing off Samar Island when lookouts spotted something terrifying on the horizon: the dark shapes of Japanese warships, dozens of them, bearing down on their position. The Americans were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unprepared for what was coming. Evans knew the situation instantly. They were trapped. The Japanese fleet was moving fast, and the American carriers had no heavy armor or big guns to defend themselves. There was only one thing standing between them and total destruction. A handful of small destroyers. Evans didn't hesitate. He ordered, "General quarters, all hands to battle stations," and then shouted the command that would make history, "Full speed ahead, commence attack." The USS Johnston, a single destroyer, charged straight toward the Japanese fleet, which included battleships 20 times her size. Even the sailors aboard couldn't believe it. But Evans didn't care about size or odds, only about doing his duty. As the Johnston roared forward, her guns opened fire, targeting the nearest cruiser. Within seconds, shells ripped across the sky, slamming into the enemy ship's bridge and radar tower. Smoke and flames erupted. The Japanese were stunned. No destroyer in its right mind would attack a battleship head-on. Then Evans gave the next command, "Torpedoes, fire!" 10 deadly torpedoes streaked across the waves, leaving long white trails. Moments later, massive explosions shook the sea as one Japanese cruiser was struck and forced to withdraw, heavily damaged. The Johnston had drawn first blood, but the victory came at a price. Enemy shells began to rain down around her. The Yamato's monstrous guns fired at extreme range, the shells landing with explosions that sent towers of water skyward. One shell struck the Johnston near the bridge, wounding Evans and killing several crew members. Despite the chaos, the crew kept fighting. Smoke poured from the ship, alarms blared, but the gunners refused to stop firing. At one point, Evans, with his hand bandaged and face covered in soot, was seen steering the ship manually after the bridge controls failed. He shouted encouragement to his men through a bullhorn, "We're going in! We're not coming out!" The USS Johnston's relentless attack inspired other American ships nearby to join the fight. Together, these destroyers launched torpedoes, laid down smoke screens, and shielded the vulnerable carriers behind them. What followed was one of the most heroic actions in naval history. A handful of small U.S. ships fighting against an entire Japanese fleet. The Johnston hit multiple Japanese cruisers, damaging or disabling them, before taking dozens of hits herself. Her decks were torn apart, guns destroyed, and fires raged across the hull. But even as the ship began to list, she kept firing. One of her gunners reportedly continued to shoot down enemy planes even as the ship was sinking beneath his feet. By late morning, the USS Johnston was dead in the water. Her ammunition was nearly gone, engines crippled, and most of her crew either wounded or dead. Commander Evans gave the order to abandon ship. Survivors later recalled that as they floated in the water, they could still hear explosions echoing across the sea, the sound of the Japanese retreating. The impossible had happened. Against all odds, the USS Johnston and her sister ships had forced the mighty Japanese fleet to retreat, saving the American carriers and possibly the entire invasion of the Philippines. When the battle ended, over 180 of Johnston's crew were lost, including Commander Evans. He was later posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the first Native American naval officer to receive it. His bravery turned the USS Johnston from just another destroyer into a legend, and cemented her place as one of the most dangerous, fearless, and respected American warships of all time. The Japanese survivors of the battle later admitted they couldn't believe what they had witnessed. A single destroyer charging straight at their fleet had left them shaken. One Japanese admiral reportedly said that if the American Navy was filled with men like Evans, then Japan's defeat was inevitable. The legend of the USS Johnston spread through every U.S. ship in the Pacific. To sailors, she wasn't just a destroyer. She was a symbol of what courage meant in its purest form. As the smoke from the battle off Samar cleared, the ocean was silent, except for the faint sound of waves splashing against floating wreckage. The once mighty USS Johnston was gone, swallowed by the deep waters of the Philippine Sea. But her legacy had just begun. Even as the Japanese fleet retreated, stunned and battered, the bravery of that single destroyer became a story whispered across every ship in the Pacific. Survivors from the Johnston drifted in the open ocean for hours, some for nearly 2 days. Surrounded by oil slicks, debris, and the bodies of their fallen shipmates, many were wounded, sunburned, and dehydrated. But they clung to life and to one unshakable truth. They had witnessed something extraordinary. One of them later said, "We didn't lose a ship that day. we gained a legend. When the reports of the battle reached U.S. Navy headquarters, even the senior admirals couldn't believe it. A small task group of escort carriers and destroyers, nicknamed Taffy 3, had stood their ground against one of the most powerful Japanese surface fleets ever assembled. And at the center of that defense was the Johnston, a ship that refused to die quietly. Historians later calculated that the Japanese fleet had more than 20 times the firepower of the American group. Yet somehow, through courage, surprise, and sheer determination, the smaller American force inflicted devastating damage and forced the Japanese to withdraw. The Johnston's attack confused and demoralized the enemy, making them believe they were facing a much larger force. That illusion changed the entire battle. In the days that followed, search parties scoured the waters for survivors. Of the 327 men aboard the Johnston, only 141 were rescued. The rest were lost at sea. Commander Ernest E. Evans was among the missing, last seen on deck, giving orders until the moment his ship slipped beneath the waves. For his incredible bravery, Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The citation described his gallant and intrepid conduct at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Even the Japanese respected him. Years later, Japanese officers who survived the battle admitted that Evans's courage had stunned them. One admiral called his actions the bravest thing I have ever seen. But the story didn't end there. As the war progressed, the legend of the Johnston became a symbol for every sailor in the Pacific. Whenever new recruits boarded a destroyer, the officers would tell them about Evans and his crew, about how one small ship dared to fight the impossible battle. It was a reminder that courage wasn't measured by size or firepower, but by spirit and will. After the war ended, the Johnston's name was remembered in naval academies, books, and memorials, yet for decades her final resting place remained a mystery. The exact spot where she sank was never confirmed. The ocean had swallowed her whole, nearly 21,000 feet below the surface. For historians and veterans, it became one of the great unsolved mysteries of World War II. That changed nearly 8 decades later. In 2021, a private expedition led by American explorers finally located the wreck of the USS Johnston at a depth of over 21,000 feet, making it the deepest shipwreck ever discovered. The images were haunting. Her guns still pointed toward where the enemy fleet had been. Her hull torn but intact, resting silently in the darkness of the deep sea. It was as if the ship was still standing guard, a ghost frozen in time. When news of the discovery spread, it reignited memories of the courage shown that day in 1944. For the families of the men who served on her, it was deeply emotional. Sons and daughters who had grown up without knowing what happened to their fathers finally had answers. They could now say, with pride, "We found her." The expedition team noted something remarkable. Despite being underwater for more than 75 years, much of the Johnston's structure remained recognizable. Her name was still faintly visible on the bow, and many of her gun mounts were still in place. It was as if time itself had preserved her story, a testament to both American craftsmanship and the ship's indomitable spirit. Naval historians often debate what made the Johnston so special. Was it her design, her speed, her weapons? But most agree it was the human factor, the crew's unshakable courage under Commander Evans. He inspired his men to fight beyond their limits. Even after the bridge was destroyed and communications were lost, individual gun crews kept firing on their own initiative. They didn't need orders. They already knew what Evans would have told them. Keep fighting. One survivor later recalled that during the thick of battle, when visibility dropped to near zero and explosions were rocking the ship, the crew wasn't thinking about survival. They were thinking about the next shot, the next reload, the next hit on the enemy. "We were a machine," he said. A machine that refused to stop until the ship stopped breathing. The Johnston story also carried a deeper message about the evolution of naval warfare. The battle off Samar showed that the era of giant battleships was ending. Speed, intelligence, and flexibility now mattered more than size. The destroyers had proven that smaller, faster ships could outthink and outfight even the most heavily armed opponents. That lesson shaped the future of naval design for decades to come. But beyond tactics and strategy, there was something almost spiritual about the Johnston's final fight. She represented the purest form of duty, to stand and fight even when you know the odds are hopeless. For Evans and his men, it wasn't about victory or survival. It was about doing what had to be done. And that kind of courage never fades with time. When modern U.S. Navy destroyers sail the Pacific today, many still carry echoes of the Johnston sailors talk about her during training. Her name appears in textbooks, and her actions are taught as examples of leadership under fire. The Navy even built another destroyer decades later and gave it the same name, USS Johnston, DD-821, as a tribute to the first in ceremonies and memorials across the United States. The names of Evans and his crew are read aloud each year. Veterans who served under him often described him as a captain's captain, a man who led from the front, who never asked his men to do something he wouldn't do himself. As the 21st century unfolded, documentaries and films brought the story of the Johnston to new generations. For many viewers, it was the first time they learned how one small ship changed the course of history in the Pacific. It wasn't a story about glory or medals. It was about sacrifice, teamwork, and the human will to resist overwhelming power. Even today, divers and researchers say visiting the wreck feels like entering a sacred place. The water around it is silent and dark, but you can almost feel the presence of the men who fought there. Their story has become part of the ocean's memory, a reminder that courage, once shown, never truly disappears. And as the cameras captured the sunken ship resting on the ocean floor, one could almost imagine Commander Evans standing at the bridge again, calling out over the roar of battle, "This is going to be a fighting ship, and we're going in harm's way." That promise was kept. In every shell fired, every torpedo launched, and every heartbeat that refused to surrender, the USS Johnston may have gone down, but her spirit rose higher than ever. By the time World War II drew to a close, the USS Johnston had secured her place in naval history. She wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, nor the most heavily armed. Yet she was feared, respected, and remembered as a symbol of courage and determination. Her story was not just about steel and guns. It was about people, leadership, and the unyielding spirit of those who served aboard her. For the sailors who survived, the memories of that fateful day off Samar never faded. Every shell, every torpedo, every deafening roar of enemy fire was etched into their minds. Many veterans later recalled that they didn't feel fear in the conventional sense. They felt responsibility. Responsibility for their ship, their comrades, and the mission at hand. They understood that in the vast expanse of the Pacific, courage was the only thing that could keep them alive. The legacy of the Johnston extended far beyond her sinking. Naval tacticians studied her battles for years afterward, analyzing how a smaller, faster, and more flexible ship could disrupt larger enemy formations. Her engagements proved that technology alone wasn't enough. The human factor, leadership, and audacity were equally decisive. Commander Evans exemplified this principle. His willingness to risk everything, combined with his ability to inspire his crew, transformed a single destroyer into a weapon capable of influencing entire battles. Evans' Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously, is more than just a symbol of personal bravery. It represents the courage of all the men who served aboard the Johnston, those who faced impossible odds, fought with everything they had, and never gave up. The stories of these sailors are retold in naval academies, military textbooks, and documentaries, reminding future generations of the human side of warfare. War is not only about strategies and weapons, it is also about people who rise to meet extraordinary challenges. The discovery of the Johnston's wreck in 2021 brought her story full circle. Resting over 21,000 feet below the surface, the ship lay in quiet dignity, a testament to the men who served aboard her. Photographs of her gun mounts, bow, and remaining structure captured the imagination of historians, veterans, and the general public alike. It was a haunting, beautiful reminder that courage and sacrifice endure, even when ships sink into the depths of the ocean. The impact of the Johnston also extended to American naval strategy after World War II. The success of small, fast, and heavily armed ships influenced the design of modern destroyers and guided missile ships. Flexibility, speed, and precision became priorities in naval warfare. Lessons learned directly from battles like Samar. Even today, these principles guide the construction and deployment of U.S. Navy vessels around the world. But perhaps the most important legacy of the USS Johnston is not found in textbooks or ship blueprints. It is found in the stories passed down from survivor to survivor, from veteran to child, from historian to student. These stories capture the essence of courage, teamwork, and the willingness to face the impossible, values that extend far beyond the battlefield. The bravery of the Johnston's crew inspired countless others during the war. Their actions proved that a determined few could challenge a superior force and achieve victory. And that lesson resonates even today. No matter the odds, courage and determination can turn the tide. The story of the USS Johnston is a reminder that history is shaped not only by numbers and machinery, but by the decisions, bravery, and hearts of those who dare to act. Memorials honoring Commander Evans and the USS Johnston exist across the United States. In towns and cities, schools, museums, and naval bases, plaques and monuments commemorate their heroism. These memorials serve as tangible reminders that courage matters, that individual actions can have a profound impact, and that even small ships, when commanded by extraordinary leaders, can change the course of history. As modern sailors stand on the decks of new destroyers, they learn about the Johnston and her crew. They hear the stories of how a small ship took on a massive Japanese fleet, how Commander Evans led from the front, and how every sailor did his part with skill, bravery, and determination. These lessons are as relevant today as they were in 1944, guiding the next generation of naval leaders. Even for civilians and history enthusiasts, the USS Johnston represents a powerful narrative. It is a story of courage, sacrifice, and the resilience of the human spirit. When people learn about the Johnston, they understand that war is not just about strategy or technology, it's about people, choices, and the will to do what is right even when failure seems inevitable. The ship's story also highlights the unpredictable nature of warfare. Despite overwhelming odds, small forces can achieve extraordinary outcomes. The Johnston didn't win by numbers, but by audacity, leadership, and the refusal to surrender. This lesson has echoed through history, inspiring countless military operations and becoming a core example in leadership studies. In the end, the USS Johnston is more than a warship. She is a symbol, a floating testament to bravery, ingenuity, and the human spirit under fire. She reminds us that even in the darkest hours, courage can shine brightly. She reminds us that leadership is not measured by size or rank, but by action and example. And she reminds us that the sacrifices of a few can protect many, shaping the course of history for generations to come. As we look back on World War II, the story of the USS Johnston stands out among countless battles and ships. Her story embodies the essence of naval warfare in the Pacific: courage in the face of danger, determination against impossible odds, and the unwavering commitment to duty and honor. From the roar of battle to the quiet depths of the ocean floor, the USS Johnston continues to inspire, teach, and remind us of the extraordinary potential of ordinary people when led by courage. So when you think of the most dangerous American warship of World War II, it wasn't the size of her guns or the thickness of her armor that made her legendary. It was the people aboard, the leadership of Commander Evans, and the daring decisions made in the heat of battle. It was the unwavering resolve to fight, no matter the Kinswa, that made the USS Johnston a true legend of the Pacific, a ship whose story will never be forgotten.